So hello, hi, I'm Hannah. I'm going to be talking about resilience today. Resilience is a word that we all know and we're all super familiar with, but quite often we forget that we ourselves also need to be resilient to do the jobs that we do. So I'm going to make a case for human resilience tonight, and I want to start by just reminding you that humans really aren't like servers. We're really not at all like servers. You are not immutable, you are not highly available, and you are ephemeral. And sometimes our work can push us towards our breaking point as humans, and personally I don't think that's okay. I don't think that's an acceptable cost of business success. So I'm going to talk about what we can do ourselves and what we can do to help each other build resilience within ourselves and within the people around us. But first, for a little bit of context. So the name of the talk tonight is, the sort of meetup tonight is HumanOps. HumanOps is a community that was started by Server Density last year, and I'm now product manager at Server Density, and one of the main reasons I joined that company is because I share so many of the values that they share. So HumanOps is really about talking about the human impact of working in operations today. We have a meetup in London, we also have a meetup in San Francisco, in New York. There's new meetups popping up all over Europe. We've got one in Berlin, in Amsterdam, there's one in Porto running next month, and one in Poland. And it's also an online community. So if you want to join that online community, either get involved. It's all open source on GitHub. We've got a Slack team that is open to everyone. Let me know at the end if you want to join that. And really, we're trying to build a community and a movement around respecting people and valuing people as part of the systems that we support and that we build. One of the tenets of HumanOps is that the well-being of human operators impacts the reliability of systems. And we all know this instinctively to be true. Who is at their best at 3 AM when they've just been woken up by their pager? Who makes good decisions when they've been up all night on call and they've had to go into the office the next day to sort out the problem that woke them up last night? Who's communicating at their best if they're tired or they're stressed or they're burnt out? We know this to be true, and yet we still build these organizations, these systems that don't support our basic needs as humans. So today I'm going to talk about resilience, which by definition is the ability to recover quickly from difficulties. And I'm going to talk about a few of the reasons why it's so important today, and specifically in the jobs that we do in the technology community. In my career, I've worked with a lot of different technologies and a lot of different teams, from big organizations to startups, and by far and away, the most consistent and the most challenging problems I faced in my career have been people problems, not technology problems. And I think that's pretty consistent across everybody I talk to. People are more difficult to work with than machines. And when you break a person, he can't be fixed. And I've seen so many teams suffer due to the effects of stress and burnout, and I've suffered from it myself. This is a really shocking statistic, I think, that 70% of us regularly experience physical symptoms due to stress. And I do. I'm actually one of those people that manifests my stress physically. So one of the warning signs for me to know that I'm stressed is that I start to get eczema on my hands. Recently, and although it was great fun doing it, I organised DevOps Days London. And the physical symptoms due to stress about that conference became quite extreme. So this is a little bit of a personal story, but I moved house at the same time as organising this conference, and my stress manifested itself in my shoulders around that time. So these muscles around my shoulders got incredibly tense to the point where you couldn't really touch them. And that triggered off migraines. So I was at the speakers dinner for DevOps Days London, and one of my visual migraines triggered off and my left eye stopped working. And I was like, oh, wow, this is quite bad now. It was okay because the conference was the next day and then it was all great and I really enjoyed it. But just to sort of reiterate, the physiological and physical impacts that stress has on your health, not just the immediate impacts, but the long-term impacts in terms of high blood pressure, obesity, cardiovascular disease, they can't be underestimated and we need to be worried about them. But before I start talking about resilience and about some of the ways in which we can protect ourselves and each other from these things, I want to digress a little and talk about change, because change is everywhere. Change is everywhere we look around us. How many people have had to learn a new technology in the last year? Yeah. How about the last month? Yeah. Well, that's a lot. How about the last week? Yeah. We're not standing still. In our jobs, there is no stability. We're constantly changing and we're constantly learning, and every single new technology we pick up comes with a very unique set of challenges that we then need to address and adapt to. And our own personal adaptability will affect how well we do in this environment where we're expected to adapt on, as you say, a weekly, monthly, yearly basis to sometimes quite fundamental changes. And when we talk about these huge fundamental changes, I am talking about things like the DevOps movement. I am talking about practices like continuous delivery. Because for a lot of people, these changes, they feel really uncomfortable at first. And in this room, you know, maybe we're not the people who are suffering the most from these changes, because just by being here tonight, you're already telling me that you're taking action. You've come here to learn something new. You're part of a community. You're seeking support from outside your organization. But there's so many people who haven't got to that stage yet. There's so many people who are sat at their desks and maybe they're worried about being redundant. Maybe they're feeling like the challenges that are being thrown at them are unachievable. Maybe they're manifesting this stress in a quiet way that you can't tell. So while you're here tonight and while you in this room may be amazingly resilient, adaptable beings, I'm sure there are a few of you who don't necessarily feel like that all the time, but I would say spare a thought for some of the other people who actually may be dealing with these challenges quietly in your organizations. Because unlike your technology stack, a human can't be upgraded overnight. You can't just deploy the DevOps and everybody suddenly gets it. And that's one of the challenges. And when I was a DevOps consultant, I spent all of my time working on this stuff with people, because to get people bought in and to take people on that journey, it takes time and effort, and for the most part, it takes the ability to listen rather than talk. Because for a lot of people, these changes are hard to deal with. And when we approach transformational change, quite often we approach it in the same way as we do changes to our technology. I thought I could fix everything with engineering, I think is the perfect quote for this, because we are engineers and we want to use the same methodologies as we use on our tools as we use on our people, and it just doesn't work. There is no A/B switch for a person. It takes time and it's a more gradual process. And in my career, I've come to understand only really one thing is constant, and that is our need to change. Technology is accelerating. The innovators of this world, you know, your AWS and your Google and your Microsoft, they're going to be racing well ahead of us. Sometimes it feels like it's impossible to keep up with them. And I wanted to share a story now about my first day of work. And this is my actual actual first day of proper work after I finished university. So I went on to a graduate training program at Tesco, and being Tesco, they shipped us all off in a minibus to a very nice country estate, and then they rolled in a load of senior directors who came to talk about the vision for the future of the company, tell us that we were going to make it happen. Essentially, it was just a brainwashing day, as you might expect, and we got a lot of free booze at the end of it, and we were all very happy. But there's only one part of this day that I actually remember, and it was this guy that turned up, and he talked to us about the emotional cycle of change. And he said, do you know what? You're going to go through this emotional cycle of change, and at some point you're going to reach the well of despair. You've left university, you've probably moved house, you've probably moved away from your friends, maybe even your family. You're going to be thrown into a team of people who know what they're doing, and you're not going to know what you're doing to start with, and you're going to start to doubt yourself. You're going to get to a point where you feel like it's no use trying and everything is impossible and you want to give up. But what he said was, hey guys, this is completely normal. And that made all the difference, because instead of being in a team where you felt like you weren't contributing or you felt like you weren't learning enough, we would go and we would confide in each other and we'd say, oh my God, I am in the well of despair at the moment. I don't know how I'm ever going to be good at this. And basically what that speaker gave us was permission to not be perfect and to take a little while to learn and to go through this emotional cycle of change. And it was incredibly powerful for me at the time, and I've never forgotten that. So the well of despair is real. It happens to us all, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the emotional cycle of change now because I think it's important in the context of what we do. So with the emotional cycle of change, we start at the wonderful peak of uninformed optimism, where perhaps we believe we're invincible. We've got a wonderful plan and it cannot fail. And then as we start to execute on that plan, we learn a little bit more and we start to slump down into informed pessimism. And not everything is rosy anymore. There are a lot of challenges. We don't quite know how to proceed, but we have to keep going. And that's when we can slip into the well of despair, where motivation is at its lowest, and it's really difficult to push forward because everything feels like it's impossible. There are more barriers to this change, whether it be a technology change or a cultural change or a transformational change. Lots of people hit this well of despair, and I personally have seen a lot of organisations get to this point and give up on their original objectives because you reach this critical mass where so many people are feeling like it's so hard and it's impossible to continue. But if you do, you start to climb up the slope of hopeful realism. Maybe you're making progress. It might be slower than you expected, but you're getting some results. And then finally, the wonderful peak of rewarding completion. The problem with rewarding completion is that people like us never get to feel it, because our experience of the emotional cycle of change is something like this. When we finally figure out how to be the masters of one thing, it's thrown out of the window. We've got to learn something else. And the emotional cycle of change for us can feel more like a roller coaster, and it can be really hard at times. Thomas Friedman, in his book, Thank You for Being Late, illustrates what we go through quite well. And in his book, he's not talking about people who work in technology specifically, he's talking about everyone. So where, like, my mum and dad will be going through this change where technology advancement is making them feel a little bit uncomfortable because they haven't adapted to it. You know, it might be, oh, I need to get the news on my phone now instead of reading a newspaper, or like, what's the done thing with this Facebook or this Twitter? This affects everyone, but I think it affects us because we're at the bleeding edge of this a lot more. we're at this uncomfortable phase where our human adaptability has been superseded by the acceleration of technology advancement. And Thomas Friedman suggests that the way that we address this is by finding ways to learn faster and govern smarter. And that sounds kind of sensible, I think. Learning faster is probably impossible, but creating environments where it's okay to learn is something we can do. Governing smarter is about removing unnecessary process. It's about things like continuous delivery and DevOps and automation, and using the technologies that we have at our disposal to really streamline what we do and make sure that we work on things that are adding value and that we're learning things that are adding value. So I come back to resilience, because how is it that we're going to keep up with the pace of change of technology? And resilience is one of the components of that. How can we change that miserable well of despair into just a mere bump in the road? Well, developing our own resilience can help with that. And in the study of resilience, opinions have changed. So a psychological study by a developmental psychologist called GARMEZY really turned the tables on how we view resilience. And essentially, resilience now is considered not to be a trait. It's not something that's fundamentally a sort of trait of your personality or character. It's a set of skills. It involves behaviours, thoughts and actions that can be learned and developed in anyone. Anybody can learn to be more resilient. And GARMEZY coined the term protective factors to talk about the external influences that can encourage greater resilience. When he was studying a group of school children, and some of them were in hardship, some of them were living comfortable lives, and he was looking at the resilience really to try and discover why some children appeared to succeed and to exhibit greater signs of resilience than others. He started looking at the positive attributes of their environment. Instead of looking at why some people falter in the face of adversity, instead looked at some of the reasons people succeed. So protective factors is the term in developmental psychology given to the elements of an individual's environment, background and personality that enable success despite challenges faced. Excuse me. So one of these is about our own internal locus of control. And this is a spectrum. So everybody is somewhere on this spectrum, and it's been shown that people with a strong internal locus of control show greater resilience in the face of challenges. People with an internal locus control will believe that the outcomes of a situation are within their control and determined by hard work, attributes and decisions. Whereas somebody with an external locus of control will believe that outcomes are outside of their control, determined by fate and independent of their hard work and decisions. And you can see how this relates to concepts like having a growth mindset. If you've got a growth mindset, you approach problems with an attitude that if you don't know the solution, you can learn how to get to it. And we're all encouraged to have a growth mindset, but you know, how many talks have you been to where someone stood up here and said, hey, why don't you have a growth mindset? And like, you go away and you think, okay, but what, how? So it's not easy, and I'm here to acknowledge that it's not easy just to say these things, but it's been shown that people with an internal locus of control exhibit greater resilience. It's the difference between saying, this is impossible, and this feels impossible right now, so I'll take some steps to understand it better. You know, it's really just about adjusting your thought patterns ever so slightly to help you through those really hard times where everything feels like it cannot be done. And when we talk about a DevOps culture, we quite often talk about the necessity for trust and autonomy. And I've been in organisations where there hasn't been that. It's been a very much a command and control, top-down style of management. And when you think about the effects that these two different management styles have on individuals and how they might affect where that individual's locus of control lies on that spectrum, you can see that if you have trust and autonomy, you probably feel a lot more in control of your own situation compared to somebody who is being told what to do all day, every day. And that's going to lead to greater resilience, and it's going to help you prevent slipping into that well of despair. If we look at technology, think about how architectural patterns such as loosely coupled microservices allow teams to operate independently of each other, help them to feel more in control of their own destiny, compared to monolithic systems with lots of interdependencies where one team can't move without consulting 10 others. The people who are able to move independently are going to have a greater sense of control of their own destiny, and they're going to exhibit greater resilience. And I kind of like that this all ties up very neatly. And this is my diagram, by the way, and there's no science behind it, but it kind of makes sense to me because I've seen it in so many organizations. So I put it up here anyway. And I've got another one. This is Hannah science. So your tools that you use. So if you have a continuous delivery pipeline where you don't have to talk to 10 different teams to get approval for your change to go through, you're going to feel more in control of your own destiny. You're going to feel like you have the ability to make the changes that you need to make things better for yourself. Whereas if you batch everything up into large, high-impact releases that maybe happen once every 3 months, once every 6 months, and you go through an arduous change control process, you might not feel completely in control in that situation as an individual, which is going to affect your resilience, and you might find that you slip into the well of despair. I was in the pub, as I am often, with one of my friends a couple of months ago, and she works in charity, and she works with a charity that supports children from disadvantaged backgrounds, and she was going to a conference about resilience, and I was like, I'm going to a conference and I'm talking about resilience. That's really interesting. So I did a little bit of reading about that perspective on resilience, and it gave me enough cause for the thought that I included it in this talk. This is a different definition of resilience that comes from the charity organisations that she works with, and I think the essence of this is something that we can use in our environment as well. In the context of exposure to significant adversity, resilience is both the capacity of individuals to navigate their way to the psychological, social, cultural, and physical resources that sustain their well-being, and their capacity individually and collectively to negotiate for these resources to be provided in culturally meaningful ways. There's lots of words here, but I've highlighted the things that are important. You can improve your resilience by improving the capacity to navigate your way towards the resources that you need. If people are allowed to act independently and they can easily find the information that they need to be able to do that, then they're going to exhibit greater signs of resilience. When faced with a challenge at work, can we easily navigate our way towards a solution? And I think that's a really important point. I mean, how many people have to go and find the individual who is the only person in the organisation who has that tiny piece of knowledge that you need to unblock you, versus the organisation where things are well documented, or at least it's well understood where you need to go to find the information you need. I think it's an important point because, you know, we laugh about the the amount of code that people copy from places like Stack Overflow, but are we able to easily navigate our way to the solutions that we need? Like, hello, Google. We ever spend our time searching for the answers to our questions. But there's things that we can do internally to help our people operate more independently of each other, and that helps their resilience. So other than improving an individual's internal locus of control, improving their own self-sufficiency, if you like, what else can we do to improve resilience? This is a bit of a soft one, but it's been proved to be one of the most effective, providing caring, listening and supportive relationships. And it doesn't have to be within your direct team. It can be through mentoring, it can be through communities like this. Having someone who will listen and understand your problems is one of the most powerful things that can improve an individual's resilience in the face of challenges. There are other things we can do to improve the resilience in our teams. I've got a long list here because otherwise this talk would be massive. So I'm just going to touch on each of these very briefly. As I just mentioned, we can support each other. Highly competitive environments, environments where one-upmanship is encouraged, environments where it's not okay to say you don't know, are very challenging environments. For many reasons, but one of them is that they impact your resilience. We need to trust people and give them autonomy. This has been said by a lot of people over and over again, but if there's no trust in your organization, then you're going to end up standing still, trying to get through arduous processes and having every single person sign off on every single decision. We need to give our engineers accountability and autonomy to make their own decisions. Providing a sense of purpose, easier said than done. People need to know why they're doing what they're doing. People need to understand how they contribute to a bigger picture. And it really doesn't matter whether you're the most junior or the most senior member of the team. Everybody needs to have a reason to come to work every day. In the face of challenges, so when we do start to slip down into that well of despair and when we feel our motivation as a collective is getting low, it's really important to focus on the opportunity. And sometimes it's hard to be that voice of positivity and optimism in the room. But if you try and do that, and it might be outside of your comfort zone, but if you do that, or if you encourage your manager to do that, or encourage somebody in the team who's got a louder voice than you to, it is an okay point of feedback for people to maybe say that actually your negativity is bringing the team down. Can we switch it up a gear? Because your attitude towards problems affects everyone. If you throw your hands up and say, this is impossible, I can't believe this has happened again, what a shit show, you're not encouraging your team to collaborate more, you're not encouraging your team to become more self-sufficient. As I said, providing constructive feedback is really important. It helps people learn, it encourages people to learn, and learning is one of the key things you want because it helps people feel like they can navigate their way out of bad situations. And one thing that I found incredibly powerful is using coaching as a technique. Like I said, when I was a DevOps consultant, a lot of what I did was listening and just asking questions and helping people navigate their way to their own solutions. And that was partly because I didn't actually know myself what the right decision was for them, and it's tempting for us all to sometimes think that we know the right answer, but that answer is not going to stick unless that person's thought it through. And so having a bit of patience and asking questions and probing until that person comes to their own conclusion is a lot more effective than telling them the answer 9 times out of 10. And like I said, being optimistic and confident in the face of setbacks is extremely powerful. If if you feel like you can be that person in your team, then you can have a huge impact. And you don't have to have the title of leader or manager to play that role. Anybody can play that role. And if within your organization you don't have anybody you can confide in, then look for a community. Look for a community outside of your organization, or build a community of practice within your organization. It doesn't have to be formal. You don't have to ask permission to talk to your colleagues. And you should definitely feel like you can ask for help, because chances are these people need help as well. And one thing I always say as part of this talk, if anybody does want to talk through any problems with me, then hey, I'm going to be around afterwards, and I don't have the answers, but I can help you navigate your way to some actions that you might want to take tomorrow to get you out of that situation. And then we move on to talk about your own personal resilience. So we talked about what you can do to help the people around you, but what about you? What can you do to help yourself? Take some breaks. Nobody can be productive for 8 hours straight. Make sure you have lunch. Actually, make sure you take a break from your screen roughly every 2 hours. And it's a shame that I have to remind you all to do this, but I know that I do. Because so often we feel like we're chained to our desk and we've got so much to get done, but actually after a 10-minute break, your productivity will be so much better than if you hadn't taken that break. We can only maintain our concentration for about sort of between 1 hour and 2 hours at a time. So don't forget to do that. It's important sometimes, especially when you're stressed, to observe your thoughts. So one thing that I try to do is, if I find myself in a meeting where I'm all up in my head and I'm not listening to what's actually going on in the room, is I try to sort of recenter myself, and I'm like, hold on a minute, like I'm going off on like a crazy train of thought here, and I'm getting myself all worked up. I try to like reset myself, and the more you do this, the easier it gets. But my reset is just to like plant my feet firmly on the floor, and it helps if there's a physical action to associate with it. And this is something I developed a few years ago, and if you feel like sometimes you do that, if sometimes you disengage in a meeting, if sometimes you go into yourself and you're thinking about things and you're no longer in the room, it's really valuable, and it can be really powerful for you and for your colleagues if you can develop that little reset behavior that says, no, we'll park that thought for a moment, I'm back in the room, I'm listening to my colleagues, I'm contributing. Again, I shouldn't have to tell you this, but look after your health. Drink water, eat healthy food, exercise. It's really good for your mental health as well as your physical health. And yeah, as I said, talk about it. No good ever comes from dealing with these things on your own. And if you don't feel like you have someone to talk to in your organization, then reach out to this community. This is why we are a community here. We're here to help each other solve each other's problems. We're here to learn. So I'm going to wrap up this talk by just sort of reflecting that change is all around us, but you know what, if that's a good thing. If it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you, and we need to embrace that, because we have incredibly exciting jobs, and I personally love being part of this community. And finally, I'll go back to where we started. The people in your organization are part of your system, and their resiliency matters as much as the resiliency in your architecture. The well-being of your human operators will impact the reliability of your systems. The flesh and bones, emotional, sometimes complicated components of your systems are just as important as the tin in your data center. So we need to think about their resilience as much as we do the infrastructure. That's everything from me. Thank you very much. Do I have time for questions? Yeah.
So So I have a question. I like the whole talk, by the way. The bit where you said the internal versus the external control. Because my initial thought when I saw that was almost the opposite. Because, like, I mean, how many times have you seen a situation where someone's been through a bereavement or something, and they end up turning to faith in God and stuff because they find that letting go of those constraints, and it couldn't be helped, and there's a bigger purpose, and I'm not in control, has actually helped them. And so I'd be interested to know more about that side, because it seemed almost the opposite was true in my head.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I can send you the psychological studies about it. They might not be directly related to grief, because grief is a whole different process to the emotional cycle of change. There's like 5 stages to grief, isn't there? But yeah, no idea how to answer that question. Thank you very much, Alex.
Sorry. Very sorry.
When, in the places that you've where you've worked and the organisations you've worked with, particularly the consulting part, but anywhere really, what's your kind of sense of what proportion of organisations are actually considering these kind of aspects, the kind of human resilience aspects, or to what extent are some organisations kind of considering it? Is it just like little pockets here and there? Is there a kind of movement, or is it really early days?
I think it was definitely early days, definitely. What's the guy's name? James Bennett? Yeah. So he gave a talk at London DevOps a few months ago, where he talked about doing a people-first approach to DevOps transformation, and that was the one that had gone the smoothest for him. I've never had the opportunity to do that. That would be fantastic. But yeah, I think this is a penny that needs to drop. I think there are so many misconceptions about what DevOps is, and a lot of people will just say Docker, and they will be wrong. But you know, the term has been misused to the point where you know, to use it sometimes feels like it's a dirty word. Like to say you're a DevOps consultant, people will get preconceptions that you're going to come in and do their Jenkins. So yeah, I think it's at the beginning stages, and maybe we need a different word for it. And you know, why can't that word be HumanOps or something else? I don't know.
Can I add to that? Because I think maybe it's not contending, but maybe slightly different view on it.
Yeah.
My experience over the last 2 years, I moved from IT ops into HR, and I felt that I think at the time it was a fairly bleeding edge thing to do, and it was, to be honest, it was our CEO at Wasabi that essentially forced me into that, by just through sheer conviction and just talking at me for like 3 months until I eventually said yes. And after I had done that, as I've moved into this HR role, as I'm talking to our investors who have got their hands in all over the place, I see this a lot. I'm seeing businesses all over the world bring in HR people from operational areas, so it's a sales organization. Instead of having an HR person, they're taking salespeople and turning them into HR people. If it's an engineering organization, instead of having, again, your HR person, they're taking engineers and turning them into HR people. And I'm seeing this a lot, to the point where me and my role, I'm absolutely not alone in this. There absolutely is a movement where businesses at the highest level, even surpassing the CEO level, right into your VC investor level, are expecting this people role to be done in a way that is just not how it used to be done in the past.
I've heard it called people ops in some places.
Google coined the term people ops. It's been called different things all over the place, but I think the very interesting base movement is that we're just expecting HR to be something super different. And we're doing that by bringing in people from different parts of the business, and I'm seeing that so much. And
that's awesome.
It's really encouraging. I thought I was going to be alone in it, but thank God I'm not. So.
No, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I'd just like to speak briefly, because I've had a torrid time at work, which that's kind of been one of the things that sort of persuaded me to come to this. mean, it's very interesting seeing a talk, and one of the things that struck me was the thing about seeing people from disadvantaged backgrounds. I came from a disadvantaged background, and I still have some patterns of behaviour that came from that. Now, I arrived at my current job. I'm the only tech person there, and there was zero handover and very little documentation and a whole lot of infrastructure.
Wow.
I mean, it's good to something like over 400 terabytes of storage, for instance. So I've got a lot of stuff to look after.
Yeah.
And I'm the way I was raised, because of the disadvantaged background, I never really felt that I could turn to other people for help. I've always felt that I had to do it all myself and figure it all out myself. And then in this organisation, being the sole IT person and not actually having anybody who's working with me as part of the team, I was totally isolated within the organisation, even physically. And I'm trying to deal with all this stuff. It got, I was definitely in the well of despair.
Yeah.
And recently there was an incident that basically broke some major systems. That in a way it was kind of me doing it because I didn't know enough, and I wasn't there wasn't documentation, and I had to, basically you had these pieces that I had to put back together again. One of the major lessons I've come, and this has been very recent for me, is actually learning to ask for help. And if there's people inside if there's nobody inside my organisation who has the knowledge, know-how, whatever, then I can ask, in various communities. And also, use some of my network, professional network. And that's actually made a bit of a difference, being able to do that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, you've got a room full of people here who might be able to help you.
So
that's like.
So that's been a personal learning.
Yeah.
It's been very recent that I can do that, and it's actually now starting to develop as a practice that I do, and it's something I actually have to work out because I'm so used to doing things by myself. Other key learning for me, because I've also been dealing with feelings of dread, in terms of getting up in the morning and thinking, okay, I'm going to go to work. Feeling very real dread and anxiety and fear sometimes. I realised actually, honestly, I don't have to feel that. There's some pattern going on in my brain that's doing that, but I can choose not to feel that. And if I focus on other feelings and focus on other possibilities, that actually changes how I feel and changes how I'm able to approach the day and engage with people and engage with what's before me in the course of my day. And I love that. Difference.
Yeah.
Just wanted to share that.
No, I did something similar. Yeah, thank you. I mean, for me, I used to do my commute in a rage, and I realised that honestly, London does that to you. I used to be like an angry commuter, and then I realised that it made about 30 seconds difference to my arrival time at work, and I just chilled out, and I went to a different carriage on the train every day because it was quieter, not because it was like the most efficient route to the office, and I could sit down and read my book, and what a difference that made, you can do tiny things that make a big difference to your mindset, and sometimes it's literally just choosing a different mindset because you can do that. Thank you. That was really good.
Do you think the fact that DevOps is so male-orientated and sort of male-dominated has an effect on this? Because obviously vulnerability and sort of asking for help and stuff aren't seen as traditionally masculine characteristics. So do you think that's sort of affected that?
Possibly. I can only talk about my own experience in possession of a uterus, so I don't really know. But I don't know. It's interesting. The first time I gave this talk, I said to people, I basically gave them permission to come up to me at any time and tell me all their problems, and I had a queue of people waiting to talk to me, and it's not like I can actually solve their problems, but they just wanted to talk about it. And think that was maybe the first time I was at config management camp that anyone had like stood up and said, yeah, our jobs are hard. You want to like work through some problems with me?
None of the stuff at the end seems to me, with conclusions, different and special for operations from any other thing that people do that's hard.
No, you're so
So I mean, okay, maybe for what the last person just said, there's some truth that there's a slightly different culture, that maybe things are happening that are, I don't know, a little bit different from normal society because it's very male, pure male in many ways. But it seems to me that these are just things that, we're all mostly technical people, even if we're women here, and technical people are maybe less focused on the human aspects, and therefore the difference is just that we haven't maybe noticed these things that are quite normal in some other areas.
So yeah. No, I think there's a couple of things to that, because I think we have this sort of self-perpetuating culture in technology where your stereotypical techie guy persona is often quite grumpy, quite introverted, not really a people person, and because that persona of like, oh, this is what a good engineer looks like, we end up hiring people who exhibit those personality traits and maybe those preferences in communication, because we've come to believe that they correlate somehow to technical ability, which obviously we know isn't true, but it's a bias that some of us carry with us, a lot of it carry with us, and we need to actively address those. The second thing is, I think we do have really unique jobs. Like, how many, how many other careers are there where you can be expected to be awake at 3 a.m. in the morning fixing stuff that's potentially costing your company millions of pounds, or at least thousands, in lost revenue, and then also be expected to pick up new tools and new skills almost immediately as soon as you're required to? I think we do have quite a unique job, but then I haven't done all the jobs, so maybe not.
Being a doctor, if you have to, you have to come in, some kind of doctors have to really work in the middle of the night, because that's when people get sick and need operations and so on and so forth. They need to very, very quickly. So there are lots of other... Yeah,
there's the studies into alert fatigue are usually based in the medical profession, but they're completely relevant to our profession as well. Yeah, there are other examples, but I think we've got almost like we've got an interesting environment to work in, shall we say? And we could all do with thinking about how we make it better.
Great. Thank you very much, Hannah.